Think about the last time you sat with a decision that felt too big to make. Which career, which relationship, which city, which version of yourself to become. Chances are, nobody forced your hand. You had options. You had, in fact, more options than any generation before you. So why did it feel less like freedom and more like drowning? We live in what is probably the most unrestricted era in human history. No arranged marriages, no fixed castes, no single approved path from birth to death. You can be anything, love anyone, live anywhere. And yet, here's the paradox. Anxiety, burnout, and a strange, low-grade despair have become almost default settings of modern life. We are told that freedom is the goal. We got the goal. Why does it feel like a burden instead of a prize? I would argue that freedom, stripped of structure, doesn't liberate us. It exposes us. And once you see how, you start noticing this exposure everywhere. In the way you scroll through 5 relationship options before breakfast, in the low hum of dread before opening your own calendar, in the exhaustion of a life with no one to blame but yourself. This isn't just a personal glitch, it's structural. Rates of anxiety disorders have climbed steadily across industrialized nations, even as material comfort has increased. We have more choices in food, career, partners, identity, and lifestyle than any society in recorded history. And simultaneously, more people reporting that they don't know who they are or what they actually want. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han has spent much of his work trying to explain this exact contradiction. He argues that the modern subject is no longer disciplined from the outside. No king, no church, no boss standing over you with a whip. Instead, we've internalized the whip. We discipline ourselves, and somehow that feels worse because there's no external tyrant left to blame. Just us, failing to optimize a life we supposedly chose freely. Notably, this isn't a complaint about too many choices at the grocery store. It's about a deeper condition. When every outcome in your life is framed as the result of your own decisions, every disappointment becomes evidence of your own inadequacy. Before we go further into why this happens, and, more importantly, what to actually do with that discomfort, if these ideas are resonating, it might help to subscribe. I'm building this channel around exactly this kind of slow, honest thinking about the conditions we live in, not just the symptoms we feel. It costs nothing, and it means these essays keep reaching people who need a different lens on their exhaustion. Now back to the paradox. Han calls this shift from disciplinary society to what he names the achievement society. In the old model, power said, you must. In the achievement society, power says, you can. And that small linguistic shift changes everything. When you must do something and fail, the failure belongs to the system. When you can do something and fail, the failure belongs only to you. Picture a Sunday evening. You had the whole weekend free. Genuinely free. No obligations. And yet by 9 p.m., you feel a specific kind of guilt. You didn't read the book, didn't go to the gym, didn't call your parents, didn't rest properly either. Nobody assigned you these tasks. You assigned them to yourself, using freedom as the material to build your own prison. Han's insight, in his own words simplified, is that the exhaustion of our era is self-inflicted, not imposed. We've become entrepreneurs of our own optimization, endlessly measuring a self that was never asked whether it wanted to be measured at all. Simply put, we are no longer being oppressed. We're voluntarily oppressing ourselves and calling it ambition. Long before Han, Erich Fromm was asking a similar question in Escape from Freedom, written in the shadow of authoritarian regimes rising in Europe. His question was almost inverted. Why do people, given the chance at real freedom, so often run from it? Fromm's answer was that freedom without connection produces isolation, and isolation is unbearable. When old structures, religion, tradition, rigid social roles dissolve, they take away oppression, yes, but they also take away belonging. What replaces them is what Fromm called negative freedom, freedom from constraint, without any freedom to build a meaningful life in its place. Here's where I see a potential connection to our dating apps, our infinite career pivots, are endless self-reinvention content. We've been handed negative freedom at scale. Nobody tells you who to marry, but nobody helps you know how to choose either. You are free from arranged marriage and free from any map for what comes next. That's a strange kind of freedom, technically liberating, practically disorienting. Fromm argued that faced with this disorientation, people often flee back into new forms of authority, a guru, an ideology, an algorithm that tells you exactly what to want. It is worth wondering whether our obsession with productivity gurus and rigid morning routines is exactly this. Freedom so overwhelming that we invent new cages to feel safe inside. If you want the oldest version of this idea, go back further still to Søren Kierkegaard, who described anxiety not as fear of something specific, but as what he called the dizziness of freedom. Fear has an object. You fear the dog, the exam, the diagnosis. Anxiety has none. It is the vertigo you feel standing at the edge of a cliff, not because you're afraid of falling, but because you suddenly realize you could jump, that the choice, terrifyingly, is yours. Kierkegaard believed this dizziness is the psychological cost of possibility itself. The moment a life stops being fixed by fate, tradition, or necessity, and becomes a landscape of open possibility, anxiety becomes the natural weather of that landscape. It isn't a malfunction. It's what freedom feels like from the inside, before you've built anything to hold on to within it. Think of the blank page every young person faces today when asked, "What do you want to do with your life?" A century ago, for most people, the question barely existed. You did what your family did, in the place you were born. However uncomfortable that constraint was, it also meant nobody stood, dizzy, at the edge of infinite possible selves. We do. Every single day, in miniature, every time we open an app, promising 11,000 versions of who we could become. Now it would be easy and dishonest to conclude from all this that freedom itself is the enemy, that we'd be happier back in more rigid, constrained societies. That's not what any of these thinkers are actually arguing, and it isn't what I believe either. Fromm himself distinguished between negative freedom, which isolates, and what he called positive freedom, the capacity to freely commit to something, work, love, community, a cause, not because you're forced to, but because you've chosen it and it now holds you. Han, too, isn't nostalgic for the disciplinary society. He's diagnosing a specific pathology of achievement culture, not freedom in general. The nuance matters here. Anxiety in the face of open possibility isn't a sign that something has gone wrong with you. It's closer to what happens when a muscle you've never had to use suddenly gets asked to do heavy lifting. The problem isn't that you have the muscle, it's that nobody taught you how to use it well. So where does that leave us? Not with a 5-step plan to fix anxiety, because I don't think that's honestly available, but with a different way of standing inside the same conditions. What if the dizziness Kierkegaard describes isn't a problem to eliminate, but a signal to interpret? Not, something is wrong with me, but I am standing in front of real possibility, and possibility is supposed to feel like this. What if the guilt Han describes, the Sunday evening self-judgment, isn't proof of laziness, but proof that you've absorbed a logic of endless self-optimization that was never actually yours to begin with, and that you're allowed to put it down? And what if the antidote to Fromm's negative freedom isn't more options, but fewer, more deliberately chosen commitments? A handful of people, projects, and values you decide to stop endlessly re-evaluating so you can actually live inside them instead of forever standing at their entrance. This isn't about rejecting freedom. It's about noticing that freedom without commitment is just an open door you never walk through, and that closing a few doors on purpose might be the most freeing decision available to you. Maybe the question was never, how do I get more freedom? Maybe it was always, what am I willing to be bound to on purpose so that the rest of my freedom finally means something?